Now let's see how we can secure our device with these different malwares. So the simple technique that we can use to secure our device is the antivirus, which is a pretty simple software which scan the application file, our OS file, for their integrity, for their different behaviors as well. So antivirus different softwares, they implement two common techniques. The first one is the signature based, in which they create the hash value of the file and compare it with the hashes they have in the DB itself. So they carry a database with different hash values for previously known malwares, and they compare the file hash within the DB. If the hash value matches, the file will be considered as malware, or which is usually known as insecure. And if the file hash does not match any value in the DB, it will be considered as secure or a normal general file. The second method which is implemented by this antivirus is the behavior based check. In case of behavior based, they usually execute or open that file in the sandbox environment, and in the sandbox they overcome the limitation of executing or infecting the existing data in the main system, because whenever you perform any operation in the sandbox, it will not affect any file, any process in the main system. In the outside the particular system, outside the particular sandbox environment, nothing will be impacted. So antivirus softwares, they try to execute every function of that particular malware file in the sandbox environment just to analyze its behavior, what different operations are performed by the malware if we execute it. Now these are the two different methods implemented by the security team to check and identify different malwares. Now attackers, hackers, they use different techniques to bypass these signature based checks and these behavior based checks. The first one is they use different encoders, in which they simply encode their file into different character sets or into different formats. Other than encoders, they also use different cryptors, which generally encrypt the malware and attach the decryptor with the file. And whenever we execute the file, decryptor will simply decrypt the malware, and then malware will be executed. A simple format. Other than encoders, we have different techniques as well. Like you can use the polymorphic malwares, you can use metamorphic malwares as well, which usually they are somewhat similar as well. So in polymorphic, they make some changes in the existing file of the malware but with the same functionality. For example, they will add some comments, they will change the variable name. So these kind of common changes are made in the malware file just to overcome the signature based detection. And if you talk about metamorphic, in that case of metamorphic, they usually rewrite their existing code for the same functionality. Let's say they have 5 lines of code for the first victim, then after infecting the first device, they will rewrite their own code for the second victim. The same code, same function will not be used for the two different devices. They will rewrite their own code, and rewriting their own code is usually considered as metamorphic. And if you make minor changes, that is considered as polymorphic. Now other than this polymorphic, metamorphic, these encoders and descriptors, attackers use different techniques. For example, they use some anti-debugger to verify that the malware or the file is attached to any particular debugger or not. If the file is attached to the debugger, the execution of the malware will not be performed. The malware will never be executed. Right? Other than this anti-debugger, they can also implement some time-based delays just to overcome the checks that are implemented by the antivirus, just to know that if we execute the file for, let's say, an hour, for 2 hours, how the application behaves. The file is usually scanned for 1 hour or let's say half an hour, right? You can simply add a skills, you can simply add a condition that we will execute the malware only after 30 minutes of executing the main file, right? It will act as a time bomb. You will only execute the malware after 30 minutes. Or you can also make checks, you can also append the checks that only execute the malware if a certain condition is fulfilled. For example, if the device has a certain software, for example, let's say if the device has Office 2016 or 2010 or any version before than 2016, if the device has an older version of Office 365, then we can execute the malware. So this kind of checks can also be added in the malware just to overcome these behavior based scans for the device. Now, there are different formats, different frameworks that you can use to create the malware, and the most common, or the let's say the one which is available in our Kali Linux, is the Metasploit framework, which is managed by Rapid7. If you want, you can go with the GUI version of the Metasploit framework as well. By default, only CLI is available, so you have to work with the CLI by default. Otherwise, you can go with Armitage as the GUI part of this Metasploit MSF framework. In short, we call it MSF, right? Other than this, you can go with some other frameworks as Dark Comet is one, Fat Rat is there. There are few other frameworks as well which you can use for the malware creation. So Dark Comet, Fat Rat, Cobalt Strike, these are the few common frameworks that you can utilize to create the malware. Now, malware is not a very lengthy, very critical code that you have to create, that you have to write by your own, right, or written by these frameworks. Malware is a pretty simple application which only perform the unintentional operation. That's all what it does. If I give you a simple example, for let's say I'm going to this Windows machine, and if I open my notepad, I'm simply writing a basic logic bomb here. Let's say I'm writing a simple loop. I have just tagged this particular line as the loop, so we can use our go-to functions later. So I'm going to create a folder with the mkdir command. I'm going to name it as abcd. Then I'm going to move inside this abcd, and then let's go with echo, and let's say folder created. Simple, pretty simple commands. And then go to loop. These are the few lines which will be considered as a malware, right? Because it will keep on creating folders inside the device. It will create a folder, move inside it, print the output line, and then go back to this loop. This is an infinite loop which you will use to create infinite folders inside your system, right? The same you can use to create the files just to consume the storage of the device. So if I want to execute it, just save the file. Let's say I'm going to save it in the download folder, and inside download, let's create a new folder, and I'm going to name it as test, and we're going to save this file as malware.bat, and the type will be all files, right? Let's save the file, and now let's see it will create 100 or 1000 of folders or not. So let's go to downloads, go to test. Here we can see this is our malware file. If you just go with the properties, right click properties, you can see the description of the file is malware.bat, and the type of file is Windows batch file. It means you can execute it, because we know in the Windows device you can execute a .bat file. Simple. Now if I execute it, you will see we get few results on our terminal. If I just pause it for a second, you can see the file name or extension is too long, we are getting errors. But if you scroll it, you can see we are getting the same error on the terminal. But if you close it and if you see on the file explorer, you may get to know that the folder is created, and inside the folder there are multiple abcd folders, right? So if you want to consume the space of any victim device, you just have to create these empty files, or you just have to create a file with a pretty simple, let's say abcd as the content, right? So the only point is, all you have to do is just create a file, right, just to consume the space, and then execute the script for let's say 1 minute or 2 minutes, or let's say an hour, right? It will definitely consume all of your disk space. If the file size is, let's say, 1 MB, for one file we consume 1 MB, right? And creating 1024 files will consume 1 GB of the storage space with this simple 4-5 lines, right? So malware is not always a complicated code that is written by you. It could be a simple 4 or 5 line code, or it could be a 4 character code as well. For example, if I'm gonna write %0 pipe %0, that's all. This %0 is used to create a null process, and the pipe here is used for the loop, and again we create a null process, right? It means we create a process, then again we create a child process, and we're gonna loop this up to infinity. So if I save this file and try to execute it, but before that let's go with the task manager, and let's see the usage status that we are using 28 or 26 30% of CPU and around 70% of memory, because we are running the Windows in our virtual machine. So we are only using 4 GB of RAM, which is again always low for the Windows devices, and based on the available memory they always utilize it between the application and the OS itself. So we are using 60 or 79% of the memory itself, and we're using 16% of the CPU right now. But as soon as I execute this malware, you can see the CPU usage is 100% and memory usage is slowly increasing, and pretty soon the device will be unaccessible, right? Device will stop responding and you will not be able to work anything, perform any action on this Windows device. Now suppose if we execute these 4-5 lines on a particular application server or any server, right? Just executing these 4-5 lines will completely break the application flow and completely make the application unavailable, right? The simple solution is you just have to restart your device. So let's just power it to the firmware and let's restart it normally. So if you restart a server, it might take like 3 to 4 minutes for a normal application server, because it has a lot of application, lot of processes to function before starting the application itself. And then again, starting the application will also take some time, right? And that short duration, short outage for a particular significant sensitive application could cause a major loss to the organization. So these kind of simple logics or simple malwares can also be harmful to the organization, right? All you have to do is just write these 4-5 characters to the a bad file.